I'm going to kick it off before we jump into the meat of the questions to our amazing speakers to introduce themselves. So, Sophie, I'll kick it to you, and if you want to popcorn a bit after that, that'd be great.
Amazing. Well, thanks, Nicole, for running the show here. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today here. Super excited to chat about this topic. My name is Sophie, and as Nicole mentioned, I'm the founder of Formation. And my background is I started off as a software engineer myself. I was at Meta for many years, and then I transitioned to Nextdoor for many years. And I remember that transition very distinctly. Despite having, got a classic CS degree from a good school from Carnegie Mellon and having had experience at Facebook, I actually didn't feel like I knew how to navigate that career transition. Um, you know, going from where I was a huge company to trying to go find somewhere smaller, right? And it was the first time in my career like facing a job hunt that wasn't just attending a career fair. And since then I've interviewed hundreds of engineering candidates, directly managed engineers from I think every type of background and experience level, ranging from new grads all the way to staff to principal level and to engineering managers. And I've seen a lot of stories play out, and just hope that I can impart some of the patterns that I've seen on these journeys along the way to you all here today. And I'll popcorn it over to Raul.
All right. Hey, everyone. And thanks to the Formation team for putting this together. I'm Rahul. I'm in the Bay Area. I worked at Meta for about 4.5 years. I worked at Pinterest for about 2.5 years. I worked at a startup before that. And before that, I was at Stanford. And one of the things that I have a distinct memory of is graduating. I felt like, oh, I was on top of the world. I had a ton of offers at a bunch of different companies. And I felt very, probably overconfident, frankly, in my ability. And then when I got into the job, I realized that there was a huge gap between succeeding in school and succeeding in industry and passing interviews and networking. And so I think I got lucky with a bunch of really good mentors along the way. And I attribute a lot of, my own career growth to just having the ability to learn from amazing people. And that's kind of what led me to grow my career. And 2 years ago, I started my own company, which is just focused on helping engineers and getting really amazing people to share their knowledge. And so both Sophie and Jordan have taught courses on the company I'm building now called Taro. So I'm a huge believer in just mentorship and your network, and I'm super excited to be here. Jordan, go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely happy to be here alongside Rahul, Sophie, and I mean, thanks Formation for hosting us, and thanks everyone for coming here as well. If any of you are subscribed to High Growth Engineer, then big shout out to you too. To all my fellow high growth engineers. But yeah, to that, I am the author of the High Growth Engineer newsletter. That is a pretty popular engineering newsletter. It's got like, I think I'm almost at the 80K number, which is crazy. And I'm also a senior software engineer at Pinterest. So Rahul and I are also Pinterest, buddies in that sense. And in terms of my path, I essentially went from not getting a return offer at a internship at Twitter at the time to getting promoted very quickly at the place that I did manage to get a job to senior engineer in 2 years, and have since sort of went from Twitter to Gusto, which is sort of medium-sized company, and then went to a smaller sized company, had sort of a lead role there, and then went to Pinterest after that. So now I'm working as a senior engineer at Pinterest and writing the newsletter, and I love trying to mentor people as much as I can, give actionable advice, try to boil things down to simple frameworks and make things as easy as possible to do the right thing. So super excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you three for those intros. I know from the Formation side of things, we definitely value and are thankful for our partnerships with both of you. So excited we're all in the same room and kind of imparting the wisdom that both of you are sharing individually all together. To kick things off, I think let's just kind of level set about what the job market has looked like and what is kind of in store in the new year. It's a question we often get asked in terms of kind of what to expect. So, Sophie, I'd love to hear from you what's in store for people the rest of 2024. And if you can kind of chat about what the job market has looked like this year, and what people can possibly expect going into the holidays.
Yeah, for sure. So every time I answer a question of this sort, I always want to start by saying that in reality, there's so many factors that impact the job market, and anyone knows. No one knows anything, right? In the short term, we have like a little bit higher confidence, and as things go out like further into the future, there's just more and more factors. And I think things are happening every day now that are like impacting how our industry is going to shape out over the next, months and years. But at a high level, I would say right now, the tech industry is in a state of recovery. And I would say we've really been seeing that over the last, I would say, 6 months or so. At formation, our internal data is showing, the top companies that we are currently seeing placements at are very much the like big tech companies. I think the two top companies right now are Meta and Amazon in terms of our placements. And I expect that trend to continue. In terms of looking at the job industry or the job market as a whole, what we've been seeing is for the last couple of years is that the market is kind of most hot and moving in January and in Q1, accompanied by a heightened amount of layoffs. So there's just a lot of movement in Q1, so more layoffs and more job postings, and those kind of decreasing over the last quarters. The good news is that year over year for the last 2 years, the amount of layoffs has actually been reducing in half, but the amount of job positions open are slowly increasing. And so I think that is expected to continue as well. Yeah, not sure if I answered the question though.
Yeah, I think that leads in really well to the next question, actually, that I feel like you covered, some hiring trends and also what to expect the rest of the year. And so based on what you mentioned, it sounds like, the job market's likely to slow down a bit towards the end of this year. And like you mentioned, hopefully pick back up and spike kind of in January. Curious from actually both yours and Raul's perspective, what do you recommend people do in the meantime? So we have, November and December left. We have the holidays coming up. Do you recommend that people take this time to prepare? Do you recommend people take this time to rest? What's your advice for folks in these last 2 months of the year?
Actually, before moving on to that, I meant to cover this point in the previous question,
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
I actually did want to quickly. I know we're in the midst of a huge change in the U.S. right now with the election, and I kind of wanted to address that a little bit. Right now, I would say that we are in a state where a lot of people are trying to figure out the consequences of this shift in administration, or that's going to happen over this quarter, right? And I think typically every year we see a slowdown in Q4. And by the way, that's not happening yet. The current job market as of today, I would say, is extremely hot. And we're still seeing a lot of people with high volume of interviews, and we're seeing like a lot of urgency in interviews because people are trying to close out the last recs before sort of the end of the year type of thing. However, kind of post Thanksgiving, my expectation is that the typical slowdown combined with the tentativeness of like, what does this mean for our tech industry is going to cause kind of more of that potentially than even in the typical years. I would say that there's a lot of interesting things that we should be keeping an eye out for. I do think there's some interesting consequences in terms of, typically the Republican Party is generally supportive of less regulation on large companies. And we're already seeing that kind of reflect in the stock prices that we saw today with some of the larger companies facing, the antitrust scrutinies. All of their stocks are like kind of going up with the exception of Meta, I think. Anyway, I think Trump doesn't like Meta, but anyway. I think that there's certain industries that I think are going to be shifting. So I think, crypto is an interesting one to watch. I'm almost certain there's going to be impact on that. But yeah, I think that as we head into the new year, there's going to be slowly shifting. I think where the pockets of job openings will be is gonna slowly shift over time. But I completely didn't answer your question, your new question. So maybe I'll first hand it over to Rahul. I'm sure you have some thoughts on it.
Yeah, I have a bunch of thoughts. So I'll start off with just sharing a bit of my own history and like my exploration into the space. So I was a staff engineer and manager at Meta. In early 2022, I decided to leave to start Taro. And one of the reasons I felt good about leaving my big tech job was when I was at Meta or Facebook, I saw that Meta allocated a ton of money toward upskilling, and yet very few people at the company were actually using that content or using that material. And my thinking was, hey, there's so much demand for getting better at the job. Can we just build a really, really good product? And then engineers in Silicon Valley or elsewhere can use their learning budget. And that was the premise of the company. And what happened is throughout 2022, it felt like the bottom kind of fell out, where 2022 and 2023, the L&D budget, the learning budgets got reduced dramatically. A ton of layoffs happened in the industry. And very quickly, my focus shifted to let's just get people jobs rather than helping them, use their learning budget or get promoted in the job. The priority changed dramatically. What I've been noticing is that in the past few months, there's been a calibration back or like a correction back to what it was, not quite as hot as 2021 when like there were so many recruiters and so many job opportunities available. But it's definitely way, way better compared to what it was. And I anticipate that things will continue in the 2025, especially with the change of administration. Like I'm fairly bullish on tech, or at least big tech, continuing to get bigger and bigger. In terms of Nicole, your question about like how should people spend the holiday season, I have a couple thoughts here. I think one of the things that I've noticed from talking to a bunch of people on Taro, many of them who are also part of Formation, is they try and do too much, I think. There's an expression I like a lot, which is you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So if you tell me, hey, in December with the break I have from my day job, I'm going to do a side project. I'm going to grind leak code. I'm going to network with a bunch of people, and I'm going to talk to a bunch of like recruiters or old colleagues. I would argue that's like way too much. Like you have to really be deliberate about what are you actually prioritizing. And the way I like to think about it is create like a mental model of what season are you in. Like you could be in a season of networking, which is, hey, for the next month, my goal is just to have like a very wide net, and I want to network and talk to old colleagues or friends or recruiters and just understand what the market is like, what kind of jobs are available. Or you could be in the like, let me just grind interview prep really, really hard and try and get really good at system design, behavioral, DSA problems. Or you could be, hey, I actually don't want to do interview stuff right now. I have a job. I want to get promoted. I want to just do well on that job, right? But be clear about what you're trying to achieve. And as long as you have that focus, I think you can actually make progress, as opposed to getting very stressed out and very frustrated and still not have any meaningful progress to show. So that's kind of my main advice, is just pick a lane and commit to it. Not forever, but for a period of time where you can actually make progress on the objective.
Fantastic. Sophie, do you want to take a stab at that one too?
I honestly, I couldn't agree with that more. And I think a lot of how we built Formation was based off a lot of this premise as well, which is that seeing people prep suboptimally. And I think the first thing is to identify kind of where your bottlenecks actually are. And choosing a focus to resolve one bottleneck at a time, right? And it could be that your bottleneck is data structures and algorithms. And even within that, there's like a lot of subcategories of where you could focus. I won't get into too much detail, but it could be, system design. It could be getting interviews. It could be, preparing your stories for hiring manager interviews or whatever it is. But it's important to kind of identify your bottleneck thoughtfully, and not use. I think that sometimes people use almost exhaustion as like a measure of like how hard they worked, and it shouldn't be that, right? But yeah, huge +1 to that.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. And I'm happy that both of you touched on kind of the timeliness of the events that are going on and what that may, signal for the job market as well. I think, Raul, you actually led well into this next question as you were segmenting kind of how to focus your time on what to do, possibly like the season of, are you currently job hunting? Are you trying to get promoted? And Jordan, I'd love to get your opinion on, how do you recommend best positioning yourself for success at your current company, given that we're in this season of annual reviews? And I assume with your fast trajectory in your career, that did not come without very strategic kind of advocating for yourself and positioning. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely love this topic. It's a really fun one, and it's one where if you apply some of the right approaches, it can just make a huge difference in how, your reviews go for yourself. I can say that there's one specific thing that I think a lot of people make this mistake, and it's a very easy correction. Essentially, they'll have the reviews, let's say in December, and then they'll start panic preparing in the middle of November or maybe a couple weeks before or something like that, right? And it's pretty, I mean, this is normal in a way. It's like what's kind of natural. It just sort of comes up and then you start to have to deal with the consequences. But if you understand that performance reviews are in a way something that you can, prepare for essentially perpetually, it's an ongoing process, then you can essentially avoid, being surprised when the time comes that you get that annual review and then your manager says, oh, you weren't doing these things 5 months ago. And you're like, wait, why did you tell me this 5 months ago? And it's because managers are extremely busy. They probably just weren't really thinking about it. Sometimes, they need to just get forced to like sit down and actually think about it. And so what you need to do is you need to force them to do it on a basis that's, longer or sorry, shorter than whatever that annual review is. So sometimes, you have quarterly reviews, sometimes every half, sometimes every year. Don't, go for that. Instead, you should be asking your manager for feedback. What I like to do is every 6 weeks, and I schedule a totally separate one-on-one that is dedicated, to basically getting feedback. And it's not even like on my regular one-on-one schedule because, if you have it on your regular one-on-one schedule, a lot of times just other topics, whatever you usually talk about, just end up taking that space. So I have that, and then I have a full-on doc for it, and I also, sort of color coordinate, like basically have a shared vision of traffic light colors for the attributes that you're sort of being ranked on, and that way it's impossible for you to get surprised when you have your review because you've been talking about it and you have this shared visualization of where you're at every 6 weeks. And following that process in my first 2 years was the thing that I basically attribute like 90%, of my success to getting promoted so quickly. So 100% have to advocate for that. I have more, but I'll also pause as well in case there's follow-ups or, maybe someone else wants to jump in.
Can I chime in there? One thing
Yeah.
I love, Jordan. I think what you said about a dedicated feedback one-on-one is such amazing advice. I wish I had done that earlier in my career because oftentimes when you do have a conversation with a tech lead or a manager or anyone on the team, it often becomes about the minutia of what are you doing today or tomorrow or next week, rather than what performance review, a good performance review process, the intention is to zoom out and think about what have you done in the past 6 months and what will you do? So I think that's a really good piece of advice that I started doing way too late with my reports and for my own manager. The other thing I would say is performance review is not just backward looking. Hey, what have you accomplished? What metrics have you moved? It's also a very important component about forward looking. Like, what will you do? What is your scope going forward? And that kind of, I think, Jordan, you talk about this a lot in some of your writing, but what are you known for? If I go around the team and ask, hey, what is Jordan really good at? Ideally, there should be a cohesive answer, a narrative. Oh, Jordan is the go-to person when it comes to these, core UI components on web. He knows more about that than anyone in the company. And so I think building out that narrative and having an understanding of what do you feel good about? Like, what do you know a lot about? And also, what do other people perceive you to know a lot about? Both of those have to work in tandem in order for you to get the rating that you ideally want or the promotion that you want. So I just wanted to add that.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and another thing that sometimes can play into the performance reviews is like a recency bias too. So there's one way which, I mean, one thing is like this sort of helps you get a lot of regular feedback to sort of improve and iterate as you go every 6 weeks. But you can also kind of game the system in a way if you feel like you need that recovery because of a recency bias effect. A lot of times there's been so many times where like it'll be close to the performance review and it seems like your manager only remembers like the things you did in the last like 2 months and like totally forgets about like the big project that you did like 6 months ago or anything like that. And so if you just do a little bit more like visibility wise, do a little bit more just polish on your work the last couple months or so, that's another thing that a little trick that you can apply if you really need it. But I also have a couple more tips. One actually is kind of similar to, I think it bounces off one of the things that I've heard from you a lot, Rahul, is setting your peer reviewers up for success. Because a lot of time your manager will actually do their feedback based on, not entirely based on, but they use the peer feedback as an input. And so the better your peer feedback is, then the higher likely chance that your manager is going to write better things and have more sort of ammunition to write good things about you. So I also like to make sort of like a 1-page doc where it's a little bit more informal and it's just sort of like, hey, these are the projects that I worked on. These are some of the things that I feel like I did well that you might it might be relevant to you to highlight. And when you make that request to the peer reviewer, you say, hey, just to make it as easy as possible for you, I made this doc here, and feel free to use it as a way to sort of see some of the things that I did that might be good to write about. And then that way, like I've seen people where if you essentially write almost what you wish that person would say, like I've seen that essentially happen, play out where they almost copy and paste like word for word what you wrote, but just coming from them in a way because it's the easiest thing to do. So that's another trick that you can apply too.
Yeah.
That
Jordan's
also
full of
helps you
tricks.
shape
I
such
love
a
it.
more cohesive story, right?
Yeah.
Because like you're gonna do so hundreds of things, right? And they're all good for different reasons. But if you have, decided how you want to craft your story and the things that you want to be known for, then you can kind of focus the attention towards the points that are really going to help you get to the next level.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like when you send that, DM, if you know that you want let's say like technical complexity highlighted,
Right.
you can say something like, hey, this project I felt like was pretty complex from a technical perspective. I think you're really good to talk on that. Would you be able to say, like a note or two on, how this project was technically complex? And then that covers one of the things that you might, need in order to get promoted.
Shared language is so important. I think I see a question in the chat that's asking about frameworks for how to create narratives. And I think, first of all, you should absolutely be referencing the actual original leveling doc of your company. Most likely, there's like a leveling doc that has specific words that can be used. And kind of what you were saying as well, Jordan, is to use that doc to have like a traffic light system, right, of like how you're doing against all of them, and also an agreement on which points you're actually going to work on, right? And if technical complexity is the exact word that you've aligned on your manager as the thing that you need to work on, and then all your peers are using similar words to describe the projects that you've contributed to, then of course it's a self-fulfilling kind of prophecy if you kind of can align all of the stories in that way.
Yeah, and one thing I'll also add there is the phrasing of like we did this together, I think is super powerful. So I say, hey Jordan, I'd love for you to share any feedback. As a reminder, here are a couple of things that we worked on together, kind of like making it a shared ownership. Because I mean, in any kind of medium or large tech company, very few things are just like a solo effort. At the bare minimum, you're probably gonna have code review, you're gonna have a design document review, you're gonna have to work with other people. And so I think that's a way to involve people and effectively reward them for your success. And if I say, hey, Jordan and I, like as I'm talking about my work, I say, Jordan and I worked on this together. I make an announcement about that. Oh, Sophie and I did this together. Here are all the cool things that happened. And then Nicole and I worked on this other thing together. Guess what? The common ingredient among all three of those is me. So I somehow get like additional benefit just by thanking everyone. And as a byproduct of me thanking them or involving them, they are now aware of my work and that narrative that we've been talking about.
This is incredible advice. Thank you to the three of you. In this season of performance reviews, you're reflecting a lot on your past year at the company and what you want out of this next year. And it's also coming at a time of the year where I think a lot of people are just like reflecting even bigger picture what they want. And so if people have a current role and they're wondering, should I stay in this role or should I try to move on to something else in the new year? I'm curious how you recommend thinking about that question and kind of thinking of if it's the right time to make that move. So Jordan, maybe we can start with you, but would love to hear, your thoughts, and then Sophie and Raul's, both of yours as well.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of like two fresh experiences with this, sort of switching jobs. I was at Gusto for 3 years and then I switched, there, and then I worked at Qualified for a year and a half and then decided to switch to Pinterest. And so I think it really boils down to like, what are the things that you care most about in a job, and are you getting those? And for me, I can share what mine are, and I think it'll be similar for a lot of people, but some people might weigh other things more than others. And so for me, I care a lot about career growth and learning. So those two things, they can actually sort of be very distinct. Like you might actually be getting promotions, but not actually, like learning that much, like transferable skills. So those two things in general, I want to make sure that like I'm being promoted, but then also that I am learning the skills. So that way, if I decide to switch, then I can still, succeed elsewhere at the level that, I currently am. And so for me at Gusto, I felt like I had stopped a little bit on the learning piece. And that's why, I decided to switch there. And then when I was at Qualified, I had a manager that had like over 20 direct reports, and that made it really hard to focus on the career growth piece. And I felt like I could learn there, but I just wasn't getting that career growth aspect, and that's what ultimately made me want to leave. So, but at the end of the day, there's going to be different priorities for different people. You might not care as much about those things. So, yeah, maybe Rahul and Sophie could jump in too and share some other potential reasons.
Yeah, I can jump in quickly. So I think Gary Chan, who's the president of Y Combinator, has this expression that I like a lot, which is learn or earn. Like in my mind, those are kind of the two highest order bits for a lot of people. Are you learning? Do you feel like your career is growing? You're learning technology that's interesting for you? Or like ideally both, but at least one of the two, are you earning a bunch of money, right? Like, are you getting paid well? And there's other things too, like work-life balance, and do you like your manager? Do you like your coworkers? Do you like the perks? Like those are all important, but reductively, I think those are the two, I think, Jordan, that you hinted at, like learn or earn. I do think it is worth performance review is a great time. It's like a forcing function for you to reflect on how you're doing, and it's a great time to evaluate. One thing which I think is really tactical though, because sometimes it is maybe hard, at least for me, to like really reflect on, am I getting enough? It's very ill-defined for me. Like, what does that actually mean? So one like framework or piece of advice that I often share with people on Taro is make an active decision to stay at your company and succeed, or like, choose to be there. So what you want to avoid is, as we all know, everyone here will know, interviews can be very, very painful. A lot of time, a lot of awkward conversations, a lot of, grinding out these problems. And for many people who don't have the support of something like formation, it can be a huge tax and mental health. Like it can just like take a lot of time. And so because of that, what I have found is many people will just end up on autopilot, staying at their company for like 5, 6, 10 years, and their career will stagnate. And so my recommendation is, I actually do think at least every year, I would say it's actually worth just go out and make it a point to go talk to people. You don't necessarily have to interview and like get an offer from a company, but I do think it's healthy that, just talk to a recruiter, talk to a friend, and actually understand what life is like at a different company. Because another kind of common problem or symptom I've seen is that people keep imagining, oh, my life would be so much better. I hate my manager. I hate my team. I hate everything about my work. My life would be so much better if I jump ship to somewhere else. And it's only when they actually leave, they realize actually the grass was not that much greener over here. So get ahead of that and like talk to your coworkers or former friends or current friends, but who worked at different companies, and figure out like how much improved would your life be if you actually jumped. But like make that an active decision rather than a passive one.
I agree with that so much. I interned and had my first job out of college at the same company at Facebook. And I was introduced to professional life at Facebook. And for the longest time, I had no idea that companies were run any other way.
Yeah.
And Facebook was a pretty weird company at the time. It was, I don't know, it was during my intern class, one of the biggest problems the company had to solve was getting the interns to go home because the interns were just like sleeping at the office because it was so much fun to work there. So that was like the vibe. That was my first introduction to professional. And what I learned very quickly after, having going to another company myself, as well as talking to more people, is that companies are so, so different. And things that you might take as like, this is just how things are, like every company is so different. On the topic of switching to a new role, I think in general, you might want to switch to a new role because of compensation. That's like one category of reasons. I think the other category is, and I don't know if people always realize this, is there's like this chart that that I reference a lot, and it's like a Venn diagram with 3 circles. And on one circle is what you really, really want to do. The next circle is what you're really, really good at. And then the third circle is what the business needs you to do. And ideally, where you want to be always is the center, the intersection of what you want to do, what you're good at, and what the business needs. However, oftentimes what you want to do and what you are good at, actually there isn't an opportunity necessarily in the company for that to happen, right? In fact, like if, for example, you want to be promoted, however, there is no work at this company that requires an engineer of that seniority to accomplish, then it actually is the responsibility of the manager to actually not make that happen, right? The manager needs to put together a team of like the right people and the right skill sets. And it isn't always like they need a more senior engineer, for example. And so I think the time when I most recommend people look for new roles is one, if the compensation is unattainable in your current role, or there's a mismatch between kind of your incentives and the company's incentives. And in those cases, there should be no hard feelings, right? Like, it needs to be a win-win situation for everyone to be set up for success.
That was all great advice. I love the very like tactical questions and structured way to be thinking about that. So throughout all of this thinking and maybe conversations externally, if people do decide that it's the time to, shoot for that promotion, they do want to stay internally, they're not trying to look externally yet. Jordan, I want to put some of your frameworks and structured thinking to the test. I'm curious how you recommend approaching that goal and some of the kind of check marks you can set or how you would structure, your attainment of that goal.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have some bad news, which is that if you are deciding that you want to go for promotion in the like last couple of weeks before, the actual annual review, it's probably too late. It's normally something that you want to be planning for at least months in advance, because a lot of the time your manager or you need to do things that uh, sort of get you visibility and make sure that people know you when your manager goes to discuss your promotion. One common misconception, I'm definitely, I've fallen victim to this, is thinking that your manager is the only decision maker in the promotion process. Uh, Even if, depending on, I mean, this at most tech companies, your manager will have to make a case to other peer managers or even their manager or their manager's manager. And sometimes these people, won't even know you at all. So there's a certain amount of preparation that needs to go into that. And even if you don't have that process, I mean, technically you still need to get like other people's approval too, like, I don't know, maybe finance. But the more important one is, making sure that people outside of just your manager are able to help you with that promotion and be willing to support it. Sometimes that's also other tech leads as well. So in my case, I have a senior staff engineer on my team. He might be involved in sort of helping make a case for me. And so that preparation starts, at least for me, I'm starting, a year in advance, like trying to have, recurring one-on-ones with them and make sure that sort of I'm doing all the things that they would expect me to do when that time comes. In terms of, sort of what you should actually do, the first step is I'll take a piece of advice from Rahul here, which is to set a date for a date. So make sure that when you have the conversation that, you're going to, you want to go up for promotion with your manager, don't just spring on that conversation as a surprise, because they are likely not prepared. So if you force them, to sort of talk about it like right away, it's normally a topic, at least, I've never been a manager, but from what I've heard and, different things like that, it sort of it gives them the creepy crawlies, just sort of talking about it, because there's just so much at stake for saying the wrong thing, and they often need some time to prepare for that. So what I normally recommend is sort of saying like, hey, I would love to start working toward promotion, to the next level. I would like to, I would like your help in understanding my gaps and try to expand my impact on the team. Could we discuss that in a one-on-one in the next few weeks? And then, is they're like, yeah, oh, okay, what date would work? Okay, this date. All right, let's, schedule a meeting for that. And then you sort of have a dedicated meeting, just for that, just so you could start to work on a plan together. Then I like to transition that, sort of basically get goals from that and understand whether the goals are outcome based or output based. So sometimes, like an outcome based goal, right? Your manager might say something like, oh, in order to become, get promoted to the next level, I want to see you, exhibit more like leadership or become an expert, in this area or something like that. That's not really something you can just like, I don't know, like take a course and just, like be done, right? That's sort of like a vibe. So it's like an outcome. And so you need to like work backwards from the outcomes into outputs. And so then, you need to start thinking, okay, so what are the things that I can do, to sort of exhibit that and like get gradual checks along the way. And so then I'll normally come up with action items, and then I'll, sort of figure out like checkpoints. And then there's like the traffic colors involved normally. So for me right now, it's actually like focusing more on like service stability and stuff like that. And so my traffic light color is yellow. And so I've, come up with some action items like being part of our triage rotation and, doing that, and then like sort of, letting him know, okay, how's that going? What sort of things am I learning? And eventually, I do it enough, it's going to turn green. And then once it turns green, then that's good. You know, now I can move on to the next traffic light color. And then boom, once all the things are green, then we're pretty much good. So that was a lot. There's a lot to it for sure, but hopefully the couple concepts in there, you know, in terms of translating outcomes to outputs and making sure, you know, you set a date for a date and understanding that, you know, it's not just your manager's decision. You need to basically start preparing for this, you know, way in advance of the actual 2 weeks before, you know, your annual review. Those are my key ones, you know, to give you.
Yeah, that's great. I love the examples you were able to provide too. With that being said, there are going to also be people that after all of this exploration or, you know, looking back at their year are going to be wanting to switching externally. We have, you know, some of those people we've been talking to that, as Sophie mentioned, have frantic interviews right now because there are still open positions. And it also seems like no matter what time of the year it is, sometimes people just get interviews sprung up on them that they're not anticipating and they're kind of in frantic mode. So switching gears to going back to like the interviewing side of things, Sophie and Raul would be super curious to hear, you know, if someone is in the midst of just frantically prepping, both of you have really emphasized focusing your time. So if there were top 3 things that you recommend doing in this, you know, sprint to the interview, what would you recommend?
Okay, I can go first. I wrote down 3 quick things that I can recommend. And I'll start off by saying that I think, you know, as engineers, we get paid so much that the ROI, the return on investment for a program or a course that you trust, which gives you accountability and community referrals, it really is a no-brainer. So like, if you feel like you have that, either with a friend or a program, like I think that it's 100% a worthwhile investment. So beyond that, 3 quick tips. One is use the recruiter as an ally. Don't view them as an antagonist. Like, don't view the recruiter as someone who's blocking you from landing the job. They, in some ways, I mean, of course, their job is partially to evaluate you, but also they could be a really huge help. Like, talk to them and say, hey, what should I expect? Like, can you give me a sense of the structure of the interview? Who will I talk to? What level are the people? Or can you share their background? I'd love to just make sure I come in with a really good set of ideas or questions to have a good conversation, right? Like that's the kind of thing that most recruiters will be happy to tell you about that. And they could even offer you preparation advice. So that's one. Second is when you go into the interview, keep in mind that it's a two-way street. It's not just you being evaluated or judged on a LeetCode code problem. It's also you should come in with a perspective on, oh, have you thought about this? Or how are you thinking about the next stage of growth for the company? And I'll tell you, especially for a startup, like a smaller company, I think the quality of the questions that you ask in that reverse interview, usually at the last 5 or 10 minutes of the interview, those make a huge impression on me as the interviewer, because it really shows to me this person is an owner. They're not just thinking about the code, they're thinking much more broadly about the business. So I really would think about, don't ask a generic question like, oh, how much do you work? Or like, do you like it here? Right? Ask something a bit more thoughtful about a trade-off the company has to make or a difficult problem they're tackling and like make it personalized to the company. And the third thing I would say is kind of along the same lines, the mindset of the interview. Like if you only have, let's say you're interviewing like next week, or let's say you're interviewing tomorrow, like you really like if you are spending the next 10 hours on doing a array or string problem, I actually think that's not the best use of your time. The better use of your time for the next few hours is change your mindset. Walk into the interview with confidence. Treat the interview as an opportunity for you to have a really cool conversation with someone smart, rather than a make or break of this is going to dictate my career. No, you're walking into it with an exciting conversation. Like that's your goal. It's like you want to learn something, you want to have a cool conversation. And if you do that, I think you'll come out of the interview having performed much better rather than if you had just like stayed up all night cramming.
Good sleep. It always goes back to that
Yeah,
sometimes.
good sleep.
I so +1 to the recruiter as your ally. And in fact, I think, Jordan, you made the same point about your managers. And in fact, I actually would even push that further in that like recruiters and managers both are not just, you know, your allies. They are actively incentivized to help you succeed. For recruiter, the second they pass you through a recruiter screen, they do better and perform better if they have a candidate pool that they're pushing for that is higher rate of success. Same with managers, actually. Managers are actually evaluated on how well they can grow their team. If one manager's team is like not getting promoted and another manager's team, all of their junior engineers progress to senior engineers over the course of a couple of years, that second manager is doing way better. Their own performance review is based on that. And so really the recruiter and the manager want you to succeed truly. Yeah, definitely lean into that as much as you can. One super specific tip that I have for asking recruiters is to ask the recruiters for the specific environment that you will be like interviewing in, whether it's like coder pad or whatever environment, just because sometimes like in like the nerves of an interview, when you're fiddling with like an unfamiliar environment and you're totally fine with coding, it just helps a little bit in terms of like last minute prep, because again, your skills are not going to massively increase. I think that's actually a decent ROI thing to try to get last minute. In terms of other tips, I would say that the first thing I would consider is actually whether you want to take the interview or defer it. It is an option to defer it, right? And I think that a lot of people think that these opportunities will go away. It depends on the company for sure, but almost certainly if you're looking at a large company, like the recruiter probably has headcount to fill for the rest of the year. So they might be incentivized to want you to like interview quickly. But if it's a large company, there's going to be other opportunities. And, if you take the interview now, you also won't be eligible likely for an interview in the new year when the headcounts open up. So depending on your current state, you should actually make an active decision on whether or not to take the interview or defer it. If you want to defer it, there's plenty of resources. Formation can help. Even ChatGPT can help you kind of craft your message to talk about that, but it should be no problem. We have people deferring interviews all the time. One thing that comes up whenever we bring this topic up is people oftentimes will take an interview if it's a dream or they'll take an interview if it's not their dream company and hold off if it's a dream company. And I think that's also somewhat of a mistake, because what happens is that then you're faced with offers that like you don't get to compare, right? And then sometimes like people don't have the opportunity to consider an offer from like a company that they actually want to see. So things to consider. Final note though, if you do want to take the interview, which may make sense depending on your situation, if you're feeling underprepared and it's last minute, one thing I can say is similar to what Rahul said, it's about the mindset, and to shift it from, instead of going into every interview with like the single-minded focus, I'm going to pass this interview, I'm going to do anything I can to pass this interview, that's going to cause a lot of anxiety, a lot of nerves that I think won't help you perform your best. Instead, just be like, you know what, I'm not ready for this interview. I'm probably not going to succeed, but you know what? I'm going to learn at least one thing from this interview. I'm going to use this interview to, benchmark my skills, and I'm going to use it to identify at least one area that I'm going to focus my prep on next, right? Going back to the idea, the theme of focus when it comes to prep. And if you go in with that mindset, with a curiosity mindset, I think you will have less nerves, enjoy the process more, and even ask better questions and create maybe confidence as a side effect of that. And if you can use that curiosity mindset to ask really thoughtful, inquisitive questions, then I think you will even perform better in the interview itself. So yeah, that's my advice.
That's great. I feel like many folks may be surprised by the lack of advice of like stay up all night and leak code, and like how both of your advice was more so based on mindset and confidence and things like that. So I think that was, really, really great insight to provide. We do have some audience submitted questions that I want to hit on. Looking at the time, we probably have time to get through about one or two. But first one is actually the most recent question that was submitted in the chat that I see is getting some love from other folks as well. It's something that I feel like I'm asked a lot by prospective candidates who want to join Formation in terms of just networking and job opportunities and how to stand out in this job market. Do any of you three have some tips on how to network effectively? Raul, I feel like you've been bringing up kind of networking a bit throughout this chat.
Yeah, I'll go really fast. I have a couple really quick ideas. I think the best way to network is be interesting. Like, do something interesting, show me something interesting. I'm immediately way more likely to want to allocate time to talk to you. If you just send me a message saying, "Hey, I'd love to work at Taro," or if let's say, when I was working at Meta, I'd love to work at Meta. Like, that's not that interesting. Like, you haven't really done anything to distinguish yourself. So do a side project. Um, like show me, like, get a warm intro, like do like someone who I find interesting. If they find you interesting, okay, maybe I'll talk to you, right? So just be interesting in some capacity. Jordan has a course on Taro called Become the Go-To Expert. That's a really easy way to become interesting. Like if someone messages me and says, "Hey, Taro is not doing that well in SEO," I actually spent the past 2 weeks doing a deep dive on search engine optimization. I'd love to share what I know with you. Guess what? I'm 100% going to reply to that person and allocate time pretty quickly. So like, I think just rather than thinking about what you're getting out of the relationship, think about what you can offer. Think about how you are interesting to the other person, and then it'll open up a ton of doors.
I love the plug for the Taro course. That's
Yeah.
great.
I thought the
Thank you,
course was just
Rahul,
going to be how
for
to be
plugging.
interesting.
Yeah.
I know, I thought it was too. Jazzed up the title.
On the be interesting thing, one of the ways that I framed this is actually it's a lesson that YC teaches to founders, which is to for every company, right? Like looking for your unfair advantage. And in fact, and I think a lot of times when people think about, how do I be super interesting or how do I have like an unfair advantage, you think that you have to be this like incredible person, but actually no, like the unfair advantages can be incredibly boring facts that are just utilized in the right ways, right? One of the most exciting things that I'm seeing in the tech industry is just the huge infusion of people coming from different industries that are entering tech, right? Like people who have prior professions or people who had different side hobbies coming into tech that anyway, and almost always those facts can be used to your advantage. Like if you were, for example, a teacher in your past life, right? Like that is a huge advantage in talking about all of the lived experiences you've had in that role if you're applying to Taro, right? If you came from the healthcare industry, right? If you were a healthcare provider previously, there's so many companies working on solutions like that, right? Having that unique perspective is something that it's very hard for very hard for someone without your lived experience to gain that, right? You spend years of your life doing it. And so I would say that everyone has these secrets, and if you look for them, you can find them. I think that when we do our career workshops, like finding those kind of unfair advantages is one of the like most underutilized tips that I see people kind of miss out on.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like it comes up sometimes when I'm on calls with candidates who are job searching. They almost have some imposter syndrome about being a career pivoter. And I love to kind of share that same advice that you just said, Sophie, if it's not like you shouldn't hide that. You should almost emphasize that as it's something that's really unique that can make you uniquely suited for that role.
And I'll add that that unfair advantage may not be an advantage that you can use at all companies, right? Like the fact that you're a teacher may not actually be relevant for certain roles, but if you find the right roles, then your unfair advantage becomes, very hard to compete with.
Definitely. So we'll move on to the last audience question and wrap it up. But I think it's a really interesting one that I feel like I'm hearing a lot of and just reading a lot of. And it really is kind of like how to manage or upskill at the intersection of being a software engineer while also there's so much happening in the AI industry. So of course there are specific, machine learning engineers and individuals who are working on AI, but as a software engineer that is very interested in staying in software engineering, how do you kind of upskill to have job security and also, upskill at the intersection of those two different kind of expertise?
I can jump on this one. So I don't think you need to worry about becoming like some machine learning guru. There's going to be, people that have their own specializations, and they're going to make the tools in the same way that I feel like we always have with, like there's your database person, or there's people who specialize in the back end, there's people who specialize in the front end. So I think it's okay to like not be a machine learning, expert. You don't need to like go to Georgia Tech to take an online class or anything like that. Like, I think you're good. Don't worry. Um, with that said, though, I also am a big proponent of sort of like, finding ways to do something and have it benefit you in like multiple ways. So, what I would propose is that you try and learn just enough about the AI and ML space to help you do whatever it is that you do care about. So in my case, like, I started using, and I'm gonna write an article about this. I started using this tool called Raycast, and it's like an easy way for me to just like access AI at any point and I create like these AI presets and things. So like I have, sort of my prompt engineering like practice sort of very handy, and I have all these different prompts and things like that. And so, I experiment with them and try to do whatever I can to like make my life easier with things that I do care about, on the software engineering job. But don't worry too much about, oh, there's this new model, I need to learn it, right now type of thing. I think that's okay, especially if you just want to specialize in engineering.
Yeah, I would definitely, in terms of like the AI hype right now, in general, I categorize the types. AI is definitely employing a lot of engineers, and that is going to continue as a trend. But I think these new opportunities are categorized as like, one is the machine kind of learning, the people building the infrastructure of AI, and then two, it's like general software engineers that are building the product layer, right? The first category is these are generally people who have extensive years of education and research, PhDs type of thing, to get into those types of roles. And for those roles, I don't recommend thinking about it as a shortcut. It's actually one of my pet peeves, seeing a lot of these like ML fast courses that are claiming to teach people what they need to know in 3 months. It's absolutely not likely to be possible. I never say anything's impossible, but it's like that is the type of thing that if you want to commit 5 years of your life, I would say minimum, to this path, then that's definitely a path that's possible for you to build some of that cool AI infrastructure. The other category of roles is the product engineer, and I think these are the bulk of the opportunities. And we actually surveyed kind of informally engineering hiring managers and senior engineers at a lot of the top AI companies, Anthropic, OpenAI, and almost unanimously, like 95% plus of these people reported back not for these engineering roles. They are not looking for AI specific skills. And actually what they are looking for is stronger fundamentals that are more transferable skills that enable engineers to adapt more quickly to like changing technology landscape, because AI is moving hyper fast right now. And really the fundamentals are the computer science fundamentals. It actually comes down to basic data structures and algorithms. I think they do those interviews just like all other companies. I think that their bar is a little bit higher. And some of the kind of I would say, systems design fundamentals as well. When you think about companies like Formation, we actually partner with Waymo and to build some of their early career training programs. Obviously there's a lot of engineers that are involved in building the actual self-driving functionality of the Waymo, but then there's the ride experience. There's like the little widget that communicates with pedestrians. There's the mobile app that people have to use to call the Waymos. These are all like needs that are created by these AI companies that they need front end, full stack, back end software engineers to build.
Amazing. I know that we are about 3 minutes
sorry.
over time. No, you're completely fine. This was all such great advice. I do want to wrap up there, just be mindful of everyone's time, but thank you all so much for joining. Thank you to our speakers for such actionable and insightful advice. If you're part of the formation community, you'll be receiving this as a recording, and we can also link out to Taro and High Growth Engineer newsletter. That way you can make sure to support those folks. And if you are not part of the formation community, you'll be receiving an email from me with the recording and some links so that you can follow along as well. But thank you again, everyone, so much for joining. And we hope to see you around at another one soon.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you,
See ya. Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.